We're back, and Matthew and I have found a way to do an interview at the same time. We just have to put on our masks and sit right next to each other. So social distancing is not possible, so the masks go on. But we both wanted to get a chance to interview Mayor Tim Scott and Councilman Jeff Stubbe, who have been really, really helpful along with the Swans in putting tonight together for us. We're really grateful that you prioritized allowing us to bring the Priscilla, the Princess of the Park, alive in the park here in Carlisle. And welcome to the program. Why is it so important to talk about homelessness in the middle of a pandemic? I don't know which one of you wants that story, but.
I'll start first. I mean, cities, boroughs, townships, we are first and foremost concerned with our most vulnerable citizens, the elderly, the homeless. It's always at the top because when something like this hits, that population is always hit the hardest. So that's why we try and laser focus our attention on addressing issues with those populations. Jeff, I might have anything to add.
Yeah, I mean, just kind of piggybacking off of that, the homeless population is one that's often overlooked by people in any sector, and it's incumbent upon us as elected officials at the local level to be able to help people in those tough situations. And this is only going to exacerbate the homelessness issue in the country and obviously in our community. There's still an eviction moratorium, obviously, but that is slowly reaching its endpoint. Obviously, that's going to impact people, and you know, like Tim said, we're kind of, in terms of the government level, the direct line of having that connection with people on the ground in our local community.
Yeah, and I wonder if I could just kind of piggyback on that. You know, you guys in the borough do a great job, and at the same time, you can't do it alone. I wonder if you could speak about the importance of partnership, whether that's with public-private partnerships or with nonprofits or at the state level as well and the federal level.
Yeah, I think the partnerships are very important. I mean, the borough has limited, any city has limited resources. So really the ideal partner would be the federal government. After that, then the state and then the county. But it's important that all of us get on the same page. And sure, you know, your local guys are the boots on the ground, but the funding can come from the county or the state or the federal government. That's why it's really important that cities under 500,000 population be included in this next stimulus round that Congress is considering. We need those extra resources. If that legislation, its current form coming over from the House, was passed today, Carlisle Borough would be eligible for $6 million.
Wow. And what would that money go to?
That money would go to first stabilizing ourselves, obviously, but then also to be able to the social services and social safety network, that there's never enough money to go around. We could use that, a portion of it, to build a public-private partnership to, say, perhaps build a permanent home, a permanent day center for our homeless here in Carlisle. So, you know, those are the kind of resources that we need.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that the CARES Act that already passed, it's only roughly like 36 cities that were actually eligible for direct federal funding from that, which leaves out, you know, most communities throughout the country, Carlisle being one. So there's obviously that need for that support coming down from the federal government and then also from the state government, so that, you know, we can work to, you know, do what Tim said. There are obviously great individuals, organizations in Carlisle that are working to, you know, combat homelessness. Community Cares is obviously doing a lot. They're taking on a lot, and we are doing what we can to support those organizations, but our funding is limited, and whenever that federal funding isn't able to get us, then we aren't able to, you know, share it or use it to support those social services, as Tim said.
You know, I was the vice president of Safe Harbor when the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act was passed, which people call, the shorthand is Obama's stimulus plan. Mm-hmm. But that was after the great economic crisis of 2008, and they passed the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. And the year before that, money was funneled into the communities, really just pushed into the communities. we had gotten about 125 families and individuals into housing at Safe Harbor. The year that money came out and it was allocated, and the Housing and Redevelopment Authority brought together all the players, Carlisle Cares, now Community Cares, Maranatha, all of the different organizations that had a real skin in the game for the whole thing. Homeless prevention with Patrice Pickering. When we all got together, we went from 125 or 130 individuals and families put back out into housing to over 600, more than 600 families and individuals in 1 year. And the only difference was the investment. Mm-hmm. And that's what you're talking about, I think, Mayor Scott, that federal investment that really allows us to return people to the lives that all of us want. And I tell you what, it's a beautiful park, but nobody wants to live in it, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, the resources, it's incredible. And it's important that that funding be flexible too, because not every community is the same. And I think with that, the Obama stimulus that you mentioned, Pat, it was flexible enough that you could tailor it to the needs of this specific community here in Carlisle and also across the county.
Right. That was actually one of the criticisms, was that the money came out without earmarks. It came out to municipalities and counties without earmarks, which meant they weren't told how to spend it. And so the communities spent it the way they needed to. So not earmarking it was actually a really good thing, right? Because it gave the opportunity for the people who were, the people who were doing the work every day to make the decision about how best to help people. I remember Patrice Pickering paying people's electric bills so they wouldn't become homeless. Mm-hmm. It was really, it was a great time. And I'd love to see that kind of reinvestment through this upcoming wave of support going out to the communities.
It could very well happen. I was on a call today with the Pennsylvania Municipal League, and they were saying that the Senate is going to announce that the funding is not going to be there for cities, but that we should not be alarmed. So I don't know what that means, unless there's some backroom thing going on. So just stay tuned, I guess.
But you should not. How do you not be alarmed? I'm really amazed. Jeff, you were instantly responsive when I reached out. Mayor Scott, you were instantly responsive. Every single organization I reached out to, I've been sleeping out on sidewalks for way too long for this still to be a problem. And this time there was a sea change in the people who were interested in making this problem history. And I think that, maybe it's because people see this a little too close in their own future if stuff doesn't turn around. But it really seems to be something we need to be talking about right now.
Absolutely. I think the pandemic exposed a lot of these things. And so now, as you said, Pat, people are seeing this for the first time, just like with police reform. Those issues have always been there, but it's like when it's in your face, like it's been recently, people tend to respond. And I've also been amazed at how people are stepping up. The borough had been helping with CARES folks using our community center as a day shelter and also at night to sleep. That time was ending, and then an article appeared, an opinion piece in the Sentinel, and all of a sudden you had people stepping up. And now the VFW here on Hanover Street is going to be their home for the next 3 months. It's not ideal, it's not perfect, but it's something. If we can just keep that momentum going.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, go ahead, Jeff.
Well, I was going to say, I think that's a great point that Tim brings up about people in the community stepping up, the local VFW doing so to pretty much institute another stopgap measure, because us being able to provide that space in the community center was a stopgap measure throughout the last few months. But there's still that need, as Tim mentioned, for a permanent location. CARES' model has been partnering with various churches throughout the community, and the pandemic is more or less proved that in our community, as in many communities, if there is that need, which there is, then there's a need for a permanent location. I think from my understanding, CARES was a lot better able to provide the services they needed by having that permanent location. And while we've kind of had these stopgap measures, there's still there's a need for a long-term solution as opposed to just these continual stopgap measures. So it's great that we have organizations stepping up to help fill that gap in the time of need, but we still need to, I guess, find a long-term solution as opposed to continue short-term.
I wanted to ask you, a lot of folks get concerned about costs of different things, and you were throwing around like $6 million and those type of things. And I wonder if both of you could kind of address that. The idea being that it costs more to not deal with homelessness because then police have to do more, and then other things, like people get sick and then they have to go to the emergency room, and that increases costs. And I'm just wondering, you all deal with the budget of the borough, and maybe you can kind of address, like, when we don't deal with things like homelessness, how does that cost the citizens more?
Well, it's as you said, Matt, it costs more with insurance. When folks are using the emergency room as their doctor's office, those costs have to be paid by somebody. Police responding to incidences involving homeless and near homeless in our parks, that is money that we're paying that the police could be used for other things. So yeah, I mean, the costs are there, and we see it as a microcosm here in Carlisle. Our budget is what it is, and there's not that much to go around. We try our best to do our safety net, but again, we don't have the resources that we need. And so I'm perfectly fine going out and saying to citizens, yeah, this is something that we need to do. Our tax dollars are not enough. So you need to be talking to your state representative, your state senators, your congressmen, your U.S. senators, and involve those people and ask them to help us. I'm really big on trying to empowering citizens to use their voice.
Yeah, I think that, I have, when I was especially operations manager at CARES, but before that at Safe Harbor, it was heartbreaking that the only option I had for someone with a severe mental breakdown was the police. That's not their job. Right. But if I called a rehab and they said, yeah, we've got a bed in 10 days, make sure they test hot or we won't take them. So keep using, just don't use enough to kill yourself, but keep using. And if you're still really high on a week from Friday, we can get you into a bed for a rehab. That's just criminal. That's the criminal thing. And it's so expensive. And then if I had someone with a severe mental breakdown, I couldn't get them a bed unless I could get them to promise they were going to kill somebody or themselves, they couldn't go anywhere. And so my only resource was the police, which is not a criminal problem. It's a mental health problem. And that's a big draw on the police that have another job to do.
Mm-hmm. Kind of just getting back to that point of cost. There was, in reading some things in preparation for this, there was a report that I read, and it's somewhat dated. It was from a few years ago from an organization in Florida that estimated the cost of homelessness essentially being around $30,000 per person per year in terms of all those different services. So while we might look at providing shelter costing X amount for a certain number of people, not providing it in the long run is substantially more money. Obviously that's one report that I read. I'm sure there are a lot of other ways that that's calculated, but again, that just is one example that those costs pile up, and unfortunately, that's not the figure that people often look at. But if we have that long-term mentality, we can see that providing the resources, the funding up front is a cost saver and a benefit to everybody in the long run. Obviously, the human aspect of it is the most important part, but when people look at it from a cost aspect, that also weighs itself and pays out in the long term too.
It's almost self-preservation to think that homeless people deserve it, because then you don't think it'll ever happen to you because you don't deserve it. And so that kind of sticks itself in a person's mindset that, well, they ought to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, or they must have done something wrong, or, well, I've met a lot of 4-year-old homeless people, but I haven't met any one of them that did something to deserve it. And so we really have to free ourselves from that mindset that we use as some sort of salve on our own fear that we could be next. I have one question, and I don't need an answer today. We'll come back around, and you can, unless you have an answer today. But we just talked to Beth Kemp of Community Cares my opinion, should win Hero of Carlisle for 2020. She moved into the shelter for 21 days because there was no other way to take care of people, and she sacrificed herself enormously and her family, and I'm just so impressed that she, everything. But they're not taking families anymore, and families are still in need of shelter. But because they've had to get it on a restricted size, I do appreciate all the help that's come out. But right now, a family that finds themselves, which who knows how awful that could be when the moratorium is lifted off evictions, short of all of a sudden finding her a building, is there something we can do in Carlisle to get those families taken care of? It's heartbreaking. It
is heartbreaking, and unless we, do a GoFundMe and try and help with like motel vouchers, that's to me, again, but that's just a temporary thing. It's not going to solve anybody's real problem. Livable wages.
It'll solve it for a day. It really will.
Solve it for a day, but ultimately, livable wages for people so that they can make enough money to afford to take care of themselves and their families. That to me would be a big start.
Yeah, and Mara, and I mentioned this when I was talking with Beth, that what you were just, the suggestion, it's great, and at the same time, it speaks to how broken how broken our system is, that we have to use GoFundMe to put people into housing when this makes no sense whatsoever. And so I just wonder too if there's some encouraging words that you might be able to offer to people who are watching, who want to be supportive, who want to do something. What are some things that you might be able to encourage them in and offer some words of encouragement?
Well, it's difficult. This is a very difficult and challenging time, and it's even more difficult and challenging if you don't have a place to call home. But for those of us that have the means, just like folks are leaning into the Black Lives Matter and police reform, this to me can be the same sort of call to action. Let's do those things. Let's help folks like you, Pat, and you, Matt. Let's come together and find a way to fix this. Because if we can take on police reform, even though that seems daunting, this is another task that we can do that hopefully some good will come out of this whole pandemic and this national nightmare that we seem to be living through.
Right. And the other thing I'd like to ask folks to do that are watching is, if they feel like especially retired folks, if they feel like they have an hour a day, if we end up with a lot of online learning, we could use some people to be that Zoom help for a kid's homework. I mean, it's got to be really tough to be putting in your 12-hour shift at Amazon or one of the other, warehouses, and your kid is home, and they've got a homework problem, and no harm, no foul. We need people who say, I want to mentor that kid. I want to be their Zoom buddy, and I'll help them do their homework. And I had done that on a small scale when school got out in the spring, because some of the people I know who had recently experienced homelessness and were in apartments were calling me and saying, I can't get time off work. I don't know what to do. And I physically picked person after person that I knew was really good at algebra, and I hooked them up. But if we could put some kind of a network together, maybe through the borough website or something where people could volunteer to help kids, maybe through the school department. I think the fact that there are all these kids, many of them will be kids without homes, who are also kids without schools. That's something we need to address going forward also.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, using the borough's platform to announce these things would be fantastic. Jeff, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that's a great point, Pat, that there are people who, are likely watching this, who maybe aren't, but who have the time to be able to volunteer in some capacity. And there are fortunately great organizations in our community, like Community Cares, like Safe Harbor, like Maranatha, like Hope Station or Project Share, that are offering services, even in terms of education support. I know Project Share or Hope Station offer like support and tutoring services that it's just that people need to volunteer, step up with those organizations. I mean, you mentioned Beth and the amazing work she's done over the course of the past few months in helping to keep community cares afloat. That organization is always in need of people to volunteer in one capacity or another. And I think in our capacity as the borough, one thing is, as Tim said, is being able to advertise those nonprofits and being able to connect people to them in the great work that they are doing and trying to do. Because in a lot of instances, while they obviously need funding, they're always in need of people to help out. I don't think any organization would turn somebody away who, even if they can only volunteer an hour of their time a week. I think that can go a long way.
Right, and if you have an idea, Councilman Stubbe and I have a platform once a month, sometimes even twice a month, where we can talk about anything we want to, and that is the perfect time to give us a memo, slip us some information, and we'll put that out to you, because usually the press is there, and if it piques their interest, they might actually cover it and ask us for more information.
So how does somebody find out where can people go to get onto that platform?
Well, that's easy. That's the first Wednesday of every month is our workshop at 6 o'clock, and the second Thursday of every month is our monthly council meeting at 7. Best way to be notified is to go to our social media and sign up on our Facebook page or our Twitter, which is Jeff, help me out here. Is it at Carlisle Borough? Is that the Twitter?
I think so. Yeah, and I mean, beyond that, if somebody doesn't have the time to attend one of those meetings, they're more than welcome to reach out to me or Tim. Yeah. And I think we're more than happy to bring up any of these items at a council meeting. And I think, fortunately, if there's one thing that's positive that's come out of the pandemic, is that we, as a council, and I'm sure there are local governments around the country that are doing so, we've I think gotten better at broadcasting our meetings through different means. So they are now live streamed on Facebook. So somebody is able to, post comments to us live on there, as opposed to needing to actually come to Borough Hall to attend the meeting if you don't have time. So people are more than welcome to reach out to us, and I know I am happy to bring up things during a meeting, and I'm sure Tim is as well, if people aren't able to attend, because while we have those 2 meetings a month, people's work schedules or other things don't always make it easy for them to attend.
Can people attend remotely?
Yes.
That's great.
Right. Well, we want to thank you so much for coming on, talking with us about this. We really appreciate the support the borough has given us, and especially both of you. It's been a blessing to us to be able to do this and to have the support of the borough in raising awareness of homelessness in our area. I mean, I live in the borough, and so this is somewhere that I really care about, and I care about the folks here. And so it's wonderful that we have a municipal government that also really cares about the folks who live here.
And I would just endorse the fact that no matter how irritating you are, they always return your phone call. They always do everything they can, because they're always wonderful to me. And if they're good to me, they're going to be good to everybody.
Thank you, Pat. I appreciate it. Thanks for having us both on, and we're here to help. Just let us know.
Yeah, thank you for putting this together, for having us on, and for everything you guys are doing.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.